Not everyone is thrilled about the presence and work of critical theory, and specifically critical race theory. And I get it. As I said many times, CRT is not for everyone. Now, having said that, I think it's important to distinguish between two very different groups who are concerned about critical race theory. The first is people who actually understand CRT and have a fundamental or philosophical objection to it. The second group is people who don't really like it, but they don't really know that much about it. They couldn't explain it to you. And they haven't taken the time really to look into it, but they take exception to its posture and tone. I think that both groups have a legitimate gripe, but they're very different from each other, and so I want to look at their actual concerns. I've talked before about critical race theory. I've said it, the beauty of critical race theory is one video you can watch. The upside of critical race theory, how it's going to save us. It's our salvation from bad religion. But today I want to talk about the concerns about critical theory. So this first group that I mentioned actually knows what critical race theory is up to and objects to it at the foundational premise. The basis is the address in oppression. Critics bemoan the initial division between oppressed and oppressor, and they say, why would you begin there? What a terrible place to start. You'll divide people up in hurtful ways. You make primary someone's group identity as a victim when that only feeds their feeling of victimization and marginalization. It seems to this educated group that you will never build anything healthy or helpful for prioritizing and highlighting someone or a group's disadvantage and alienation. That's not a constructive way to proceed. To these critics, and they argue that it will never deliver you to a place of empowerment or productivity if you are perpetually deconstructing the very systems or institutions that you feel excluded from or want to participate in. Playing the victim card, in their mind, is a bad hand and will never help you win the game. That's a legitimate concern. It's an actual disagreement. Participating in the oppression Olympics, as they say, is a recipe for continued victim mentality and ongoing marginalization. The mentality behind critical race theory is feeding yourself on the negative, according to these studied critics. If you want a better life, if you want to improve your community, if you want to have a seat at the table, there are better ways to do it than focusing on the deficit and highlighting the deficiencies in the system. Which brings us to our second group of critics, those who don't like the tone or the posture. This popular and growing concern is with the general mentality and big picture approach of critical race theory. This group doesn't really understand critical theory, but just doesn't like its attitude. Are things perfect? No. But are they getting better? Yes. So let's focus on that and continue progress towards, instead of causing more division and animosity. These less knowledgeable, let's call them opponents, have a core objection to critical theory's obsession with rummaging through the past to find injustice and even atrocities. They see history as a long arc that bends towards justice. They love the Hallmark version of MLK. And they fundamentally object to viewing history as a problem and a limitation. We can't, they argue, go back and fix the past, so let's just move on and make things better now. This actually is a legitimate concern because critical theory does begin with the conviction that something is deeply wrong and a problem to be addressed. It's not fun or cheery or optimistic. It is critical and pessimistic in its tone and posture. One of its founding members, Walter Benjamin, viewed history as an accumulating series of atrocities that pile up at the feet of the angel of history, who was facing backwards, trying desperately to resist the accumulating pile of these catastrophic events, which critical theory then sorts through in order to account for and catalog and attend to their consequences. This is not a fun way to look at the past, and it's not a cheery way to talk about how we got here or where we've arrived. Now, having said that, there's an important distinction to be made at this point. Those who don't like critical theory also have a pre-existing condition to be generally against things like social justice warriors or liberals in general, poor meism, playing the victim, snowflake culture, and every kid gets a participation trophy, just in general. I became very aware of this cynicism in 2015 and 2016 as I got to travel around the country and speak with different audiences. There was an across-the-board general sense of disdain for those who are on the other side of the aisle. So I just want to acknowledge that there is an actual disagreement about critical theory and critical race theory. It's not just a matter of educating the masses or listening to the other side's perspective. There are fundamental differences about foundational assumptions. Not all critical theory's critics can articulate what critical race theory actually wants. It may not even be that open to hear what its practitioners are saying. They reject the premise outright, just right out of hand, to the presumptions and assumptions that critical theory is based on. They refuse to concede the initial point of viewing some groups as oppressed and blaming the oppressors. They take exception to both its goals and its initial starting point, and I get that. I always begin by saying that critical theory is not for everyone. I don't think that everyone should do it, and I don't think that it should be the predominant view. Here's a computer analogy that might help. Critical theory is not an operating system that can run the whole machine. It's a diagnostic tool. It's like a program that looks for viruses and debugs the system. It's not the game, it's the referee. It's an internal affairs task force that's looking for corruption. It's not the business or the bank, it's an auditor. If you're expecting it to be the whole thing, then you have misunderstood what it is up to. And by the same token, its critics and despisers are like a king who objects to the presence of a jester in the court. That's the entire point of the jester, to mock, to point out inconsistencies, to level the playing field, and to expose the ridiculous elephant in the room and to help people see that the king has no clothes on. Is it objectionable? Sure. Is it uncomfortable? Absolutely. Is it needed? Yes. So, when critics object and try and defend the status quo and tell critical theorists to back off, get in line, knock it off, and settle down, they are doing exactly what you would expect from people who benefit from the system as it currently exists. All they're saying is, I don't like it when you name the dysfunction, expose the hidden assumptions, point out the inconsistencies of my behaviors, doubt my motives, call into question my underlying values or priorities. It makes me uncomfortable and even angry. That, however, is the point of critical theory, to make visible the invisible, or as critical theory refers to it, ideology. The goal of critical theory is threefold: to examine, to expose, and to advocate for change. Because the point of critical theory, after all is said and done, is not just to explain the world, but to change it to a more equitable, just, and beneficial system for those who have been historically marginalized and disadvantaged. It makes total sense why those in the King's Court would object to that. So resisting the agenda of critical theory is a no-brainer, as they say. My point is that this is not a lack of understanding, although there may be a lack of understanding built into it. This is an actual disagreement, and it sort of makes sense. I hope that that has been helpful. I would love to hear your thoughts. If there's anything I need to cover in a future video, let me know. Feel free to comment in the YouTube section, on the blog, or on Facebook, and we will get this conversation going.